You've activated my trap card, Kaiba, which lets me push you down a flight of stairs. Hey kids, welcome back to the channel. I'm Uncle Frank, hoping that your day is not nearly as hot as mine is, and in today's video, I'd like you all to sit back, relax with me as we talk about the past and recent news. Let's say, hypothetically, you were a Yu-Gi-Oh fan back in 2002 to 2004. You really liked the game. You were mostly a fan of the anime. You tuned in every Saturday or so to watch new episodes as they aired. You were absolutely in love with the card game as a result. You didn't really play in tournaments or anything at this point. You just kind of played with your family and friends and your kitchen table and backyards. You barely even knew how the rules worked. Fast forward a few years and the game's gotten a bit more complicated. There's archetypes now, there's a chain of effects, there's a new anime, Yu-Gi-Oh! GX, and you're starting to attend more tournaments. And you're really starting to like how the game is turning out. Fast forward even a few more years, and suddenly 5Ds is the Yu-Gi-Oh! Anime. And there's even more card types. Now there's synchro monsters. Card effects are more and more complicated. You have to start worrying about what your opponents could be doing like several turns in advance, because you don't know what their game plan might be unless you're really tuned into the formats, because now you care about the format, you care about the meta, and things are just becoming more and more complicated. Well, fast forward even a few more years, and now there's XYZ monsters, now there's pendulum monsters, now there's all kinds of crazy kooky crap under the sun, and you know, you're not as young as you were when you started playing Yu-Gi-Oh! The new anime isn't as enjoyable as the one that you grew up with, and you're not really liking where some of these cards are going. You're not liking how complicated the game's gotten. You're not liking the power level that the game's reached, and you kind of check out, and you stop playing Yu-Gi-Oh! For a few years. You sell off your collection, you get rid of your decks, and you don't really pay attention to the game all that much for a while. And then, you know, half a decade passes, and one day, while you're sitting at your local game store, hanging out with some friends in between games of Commander, you can't help but notice two Yu-Gi-Oh! Kids over in the one corner of the store, and they're playing with cards that you remember, with decks you recognize and remember very fondly. And you go, oh, I didn't know there was new support for those archetypes. I didn't know Light Swarms and Blackwings were getting support. And the response you hear is, no, those didn't get new support. We are playing Edison format. And you're like, what? What's that? The heck is Edison? Well, it turns out, in the years since you stopped playing Yu-Gi-Oh!, a bunch of fans and older fans especially got together and they started playing these Time Wizard formats that take the game back to how it was in the earliest days, in the very early days of the game, for one, with the GOAT format, and a bit later on to something you might be familiar with the Edison format. You know, taking the game not just back to the card pool that was available back then, but to how the rules were back then. You know, priority was maintained in these retro formats. Certain effects function as they were. Errata that came out after these formats are ignored, for instance. There's a bunch of really appealing things going on there. So you, who are very familiar with these old formats, because you played, you were playing back then, you know, maybe not as well as you could have been, because, you know, you were a kid, but you know, you were playing back then, and you have fond memories of those decks, those cards, and those metagames. So you go, well, I'll give it a try, and to your great delight, retro Yu-Gi-Oh! Formats are extremely easy to get into, because so many of those old cards have been reprinted so much that, you know, you can build a deck for $30 and just have a blast on a weekend tournament. And you start playing Edison and GOAT format a lot. Like a lot, as in, like, you haven't even touched a modern Yu-Gi-Oh! Card in 5 years. But here you are, having a blast every week, every other week, whatever, whenever one of these old school formats pops up, and you are just having the time of your life, just like the good old days. And you're doing this for a few years. And sure, you're not a active Yu-Gi-Oh player, you know. You might buy a box here or there just to experience the pack opening experience, just to maybe luck out and get the biggest, newest, expensive big boy card. But for the most part, you're only engaging with the game that you loved as a kid. You're not engaging with modern Yu-Gi-Oh! And then one day, a few years after you start getting back into these older formats, one day Konami comes out and says, "Great news, everybody. Got some big changes coming to these old formats." And you're slightly interested, and you go, "All right, what's coming?" And Konami goes, "You guys aren't going to believe this. We are changing the rules. Now, all these Time Wizard retro throwback formats, they're going to follow the rules of modern Yu-Gi-Oh!" And your heart just sinks in your chest, because that's not what you signed up for. So yeah, this is a video talking about Konami's most recent announcement. It's a few days old now. This announcement is definitely very fresh. And I wasn't sure if I wanted to talk about it, because I'm sure that there's a bazillion different Yu-Gi-Oh! Channels out there who are going to do a better job of summarizing the changes and explaining why it's a terrible idea. But I at least want to talk about it because I want to share my perspective on the matter. And my perspective on the matter is that when it comes to throwback formats, when it comes to especially very fan-popular formats, it would serve Konami best to just leave it alone. It really would. I don't know if you guys are... I don't know if any of my viewers really are Yu-Gi-Oh fans, but I know that I have plenty of friends who are huge fans of retro formats, especially Edison, especially Go. And I keep an eye on what's going on online. Nobody that I've talked to, that I've listened to, that I've watched, that I've read, I cannot find a single person besides a Konami executive sitting in his office somewhere who could possibly be happy about this announcement. When fans of the game who checked out because they were tired of the rules changes, they were tired of the new card types, they were tired of Konami handling everything as poorly as possible, when they check in again just to play the old formats they love with cards they recognize and decks that function the way they remember, they don't want the new rules. They want the rules as it was when they were younger, when they were kids playing the game that they grew up with. When you change the rules on them, when you try to force a rules change on them to align those old formats with your new, worse rules, nobody's really satisfied there. And I can't possibly see what the benefit is. I'm sure it probably has something to do with the digital client. Konami probably wants to include Time Wizard events in more of their video game stuff, probably like Duel Links or Duel Masters or whatever. And they probably figured that including two different rule sets, one for modern Yu-Gi-Oh! And one for Time Wizard events, they probably figured that that was not worth the effort, so they just said, screw it, we're going to change Time Wizard. That is my guess as to what's going on and why this happened. I could be wrong, but, you know, I just want to say that, you know, when you clock in, when you tune into a specific retro thing, those companies that are providing the initial experience, the thing that became retro down the road, they really need to learn to just stop trying to change what people grew up with, trying to meddle with the past. Old school RuneScape is an excellent example of this. Jagex really does not seem to understand why people enjoy old school RuneScape and why they like to play old school RuneScape, why they like to turn in to a 15, 20-ish year old build of a game over the new, shiny, higher quality RuneScape. And Konami doesn't seem to understand why people tend to tune in to old school Yu-Gi-Oh formats, old school Yu-Gi-Oh cards even. You know, part of the reason retro Yu-Gi-Oh cards are so popular and so expensive and so very collectible is that a lot of people just grew up with them. A lot of people who nowadays have expendable money. Part of the reason that these retro formats were so popular, and they probably are still popular, I shouldn't say were, I guarantee this story is probably not over yet. Part of the popularity is that these are just the formats people grew up with. And people have fond memories of playing, and they don't, you know, they don't vibe with modern Yu-Gi-Oh! So they stick with what they're familiar with. They stick with their fond memories. And I'm going to be honest. My honest, unfiltered opinion here, I do not think Konami does a particularly good job of curating their game, whether it comes from a product standpoint or a metagame standpoint. And if you disagree with me on that, I would like to point at every non-25th anniversary reprint set that's come out in the last 4 years, and tell you that you'd be hard pressed to find more than a handful that haven't lost overall value. You'd be hard pressed to show me a metagame from the last few years that have been not a complicated mess. I get it. Modern Yu-Gi-Oh! Is going to have its fans. I'm not saying that modern Yu-Gi-Oh! Is bad. I don't understand it. This is old man doesn't understand new thing. But me personally, I don't like modern Yu-Gi-Oh! I like the Yu-Gi-Oh! That I grew up with. A lot of retro fans feel the same way. And at the end of the day, you know, where this video is going is, it's never a good idea to try and step in as a company and change what people enjoy just because you think you can. I'm not even entirely sure what the end goal is here. Do they think they're going to make a quick buck by turning people off of these old school formats? I don't know what the goal is here, but I don't think Konami thought this one all the way through, is what I'm trying to say. But I also want to say, the other important thing that I know that some people aren't going to hear because this is 12 minutes into the video recording, I honestly don't think this is going to be as big a deal as people think. I firmly believe that most, not all, but most people playing old school are playing at local card shops or in their kitchens, and they're not going to really engage with the new rules. They're just going to play the game they remember. Most, not all, but most people who play GOAT format or Edison format are just playing on Dueling Book or over some Discord games. They're just having fun. Sure, Konami might try to enforce their rules in big tournaments and side games or whatever. What's it called? Side events? Yeah. But for the most part, this announcement's not really going to affect a whole lot of people unless they choose to be affected by it. And I personally am choosing to not be affected by it. I almost burped in my entire sentence out there. And I don't know a lot of people around here who are going to jive with this decision either. But I'm curious to hear what you guys have to say. I want to know your opinion on the subject in the comment section down below. And if you enjoyed this video, please leave a like, share, subscribe, all that jazz. And I'll see you kids in the next one. Thank you so much for watching.